The tractor arrived on a Tuesday morning like it owned the place. And in a way, it did. The John Deere 9RX640 was the crown jewel of the Riverside Agricultural Equipment Showroom in Cedar Falls, Iowa. A machine so new that the factory smell still came off it when you opened the cab door, so advanced that the dealership had scheduled a special demonstration event around its arrival. $432,000 of the most sophisticated farm machinery ever manufactured. GPS-guided. Fully autonomous capable. 18-inch touchscreen command center. Cameras on every corner. A machine that could plant, spray, and harvest with minimal human input. Guided by satellites 30,000 feet above the Iowa cornfields, it was built to work. The dealership's owner, a man named Robert Callahan, had been planning the demonstration event for 3 months. 12 of the county's largest farming operations had been invited. Seed company representatives. Equipment finance people. 2 journalists from agricultural publications. Robert had catered lunch. He had printed brochures. He had rehearsed his talking points about autonomous agriculture and the future of farming and how Riverside Agricultural was the dealership that brought that future to Cedar Falls first. The demonstration was scheduled for Thursday. The tractor arrived Tuesday. By Wednesday morning, it was dead. Not completely dead. The engine started, the cab systems powered up, the screens came alive with their constellation of data and monitoring and capability. But the primary hydraulic management system had thrown a fault code that locked out every implement function. The 3-point hitch wouldn't move. The PTO wouldn't engage. The hydraulic remotes were frozen. A $432,000 tractor that could not move a single implement. Robert Callahan discovered this at 7:15 a.m. on Wednesday when he came in early to do a final check before the demonstration day. He stood in front of the machine in the empty showroom and looked at the fault code on the touchscreen. Then he called his service manager. The service manager's name was Derek. 38 years old. 12 years with the dealership. He arrived at 7:45 and plugged in the diagnostic system. He read the fault codes. He called John Deere's technical support line in Moline, Illinois. He was on the phone for 47 minutes. When he hung up, he called 2 of his senior technicians, men named Brad and Jason, both with over a decade of experience on John Deere precision agriculture systems. Brad and Jason arrived at 9. They ran the full diagnostic protocol. They called Moline again. They ran the protocol a second time with a different parameter set that Moline suggested. They called a John Deere field engineer who was based in Des Moines and drove to Cedar Falls by 11. The field engineer, a young man named Marcus who had a master's degree in agricultural systems engineering from Iowa State, ran his own diagnostic sequence. He had a different laptop with a different software version. He called Moline from the showroom floor with the tractor's diagnostic port connected directly to his computer so the support team could see the live data. By 1 p.m., 5 people with a combined total of 60-plus years of John Deere technical experience had been working on the machine for 6 hours. The fault code had not cleared. The hydraulic management system remained locked. The demonstration was 19 hours away. Robert Callahan stood at the edge of the showroom floor and watched as 5 technicians gathered around the touchscreen of the most expensive machine in his inventory and felt the particular cold that comes when a carefully constructed plan begins to fail in full view of people who are watching. He walked to his office. He closed the door. He sat at his desk. Through his office window, he could see the showroom floor, the 9RX 640 under its spotlight, the technicians around it, the diagnostic cables, the laptops, the 5 men who knew these machines better than anyone he could call and had been unable to find the answer. He looked at his desk calendar. Thursday, 9 a.m. 12 farming operations. Catered lunch. 2 journalists. He looked at his phone. He did not know who to call. He had called everyone he knew to call. His office door opened. He looked up. Standing in the doorway was a man he almost didn't recognize in the context of his office, a man he saw every day but never looked at directly, the way you don't look directly at the furniture. Walt Hendricks, 67 years old. White hair, stooped slightly at the shoulders in the way of tall men who have spent years working at bench height. wearing the gray work uniform that the dealership provided to its cleaning staff. Holding a mop handle in one hand, Walt had worked at Riverside Agricultural Equipment for 11 years. He came in at 6 a.m. and left at 2 p.m., 5 days a week. He swept the showroom floor and cleaned the bathrooms and mopped the service bay and emptied the trash and made sure that the dealership looked, every morning, like a place where expensive things were treated with care. Robert had said good morning to him perhaps 100 times. He had never learned his last name until he hired him. He was not sure he had ever looked at him directly. Walt was looking at him now, through the doorway, with an expression that Robert couldn't immediately read. "Mr. Callahan," Walt said. His voice was quiet and unhurried. "I couldn't help overhearing." Robert looked at him. "The tractor," Walt said. "The fault on the hydraulic management system." Robert stared at him. "What about it?" Robert said. Walt was quiet for a moment. "I think I know what it is," Walt said. The silence that followed lasted perhaps 4 seconds. To Robert Callahan, sitting behind his desk with a demonstration 19 hours away and 5 technicians who had collectively failed to find an answer, for seconds was a long time to be silent. He looked at Walt Hendricks, at the gray uniform, at the mop handle, at the 67-year-old face that he had seen every morning for 11 years without truly seeing. "You think you know what it is?" Robert said. "Yes, sir," Walt said. Robert's first instinct, the instinct of a man who runs a business and has categories for the people in it and understands which categories produce which kinds of value, was to thank Walt politely and close the door. He did not follow that instinct. Not because he suddenly believed that the man who mopped his floors knew something his best technicians didn't, but because it was Wednesday afternoon and the demonstration was Thursday morning and he had run out of instincts that were producing results. "Come in," Robert said. Walt came in. He stood in front of Robert's desk with the mop handle resting against his forearm, not leaning on it, just holding it, the way a man holds something he has been carrying long enough that he forgets it's there. "Tell me," Robert said. "The 9RX series hydraulic management system," Walt said. "The fault code you're seeing, I'd need to look at it to be certain, but from what I heard through the door, it sounds like it might be the hydraulic pressure sensor calibration. When a new machine comes off transport, long haul, temperature changes, the pressure sensors in the hydraulic management system can drift outside their calibrated range. The system reads it as a fault and locks out the implement functions as a protective measure." Robert looked at him. "The sensors drift during transport," Robert said. "It happens on the 9RX series," Walt said. "Not every machine. Maybe 1 in 15, 20. Depends on the transport conditions. Temperature cycling is the main factor." "How do you know this?" Robert said. Walt looked at him steadily. "I worked on these machines for 26 years, he said. "Before I came here." Robert was very still. "You worked on John Deere equipment," Robert said. "I was a master technician," Walt said. "At a dealership in Waterloo. 26 years. I retired in 2012. He paused. "Then my wife got sick. The medical bills were—" he stopped. Started again. "I needed work that didn't require traveling. That didn't require being on call. Something close to home with regular hours." He looked at the mop handle. "Your ad said 6 to 2, Monday through Friday." Robert looked at the man standing in his office. He looked at the gray uniform. He looked at the mop handle. He thought about 11 years. 11 years of good mornings and clean floors and empty trash cans. 11 years of a master technician mopping his service bay. "Why didn't you tell me?" Robert said. Walt looked at him with the patient expression of a man who has thought about this question. "You never asked," he said. "And the job I applied for was the cleaning job. That's the job I took. It wasn't my place to—" he paused. "I needed the work, Mr. Callahan. I wasn't in a position to be particular about what kind." Robert was quiet for a long moment. Outside his office window, he could see Derek and Brad and Jason and the John Deere field engineer Marcus gathered around the 9RX 640's touchscreen. 5 men who had been unable to find the answer for 6 hours. He looked at Walt. "Can you fix it?" Robert said. Walt looked at the tractor through the office window. "I'd need to look at it," he said. "But if it's what I think it is, yes." Robert stood up. He walked to his office door. He opened it. He looked at Derek and his technicians. "Derek," Robert said, "I need you to let Walt take a look at the machine." Derek looked up from his laptop. He looked at Walt, at the gray uniform, at the mop handle. He looked back at Robert. "Mr. Callahan," Derek said carefully, "Walt is our—" "I know who Walt is," Robert said. "Let him look at the machine." Derek looked at Brad. Brad looked at Jason. Jason looked at Marcus, the field engineer. Marcus looked at Walt with a particular expression of a young man with a master's degree encountering a situation his degree had not prepared him for. Nobody said anything. Walt walked past all of them toward the 9RX 640. Walt set his mop handle against the showroom wall. He stood in front of the 9RX 640 for a moment, looking at the machine the way he had looked at machines for 26 years, not at any specific component, but at the whole, taking in the overall condition, the position, the small external details that told a story before you touched anything. He looked at the transport brackets still on the front weights. He looked at the hydraulic line connections at the 3-point hitch. He looked at the fault code on the touchscreen, walking to the cab steps, climbing up, reading the full fault log rather than just the primary display. He was in the cab for 3 minutes. When he came down, he walked to the right side of the tractor and opened an access panel. Not the main diagnostic port that Derek and his team had been using, but a smaller panel further back on the right side of the machine, near the hydraulic reservoir. Brad watched him. "That's the auxiliary sensor access panel," Brad said. "We checked the sensors through the diagnostic software. All showing nominal." "The software reads the sensor output," Walt said. He was looking at something inside the panel with a small flashlight. "It doesn't read the sensor calibration offset. Those are 2 different things." Brad looked at Jason. "The calibration offset," Jason said slowly. "That's in the base configuration menu, not in the standard diagnostic tree." "Correct," Walt said. He closed the panel. "The sensor is outputting correctly relative to its own calibration. But the calibration drifted during transport. So the sensor is reading accurately against a baseline that's no longer accurate." He looked at Jason. "The diagnostic software sees a sensor that's functioning within its own parameters. It doesn't flag it because by the sensor's own reference, nothing is wrong." Marcus, the field engineer, had moved closer. "The calibration drift," Marcus said. He was thinking out loud. "The system fault isn't detecting sensor malfunction. It's detecting a reading that falls outside the expected range for the hydraulic state. If the calibration offset shifted the sensor's reference, the sensor reports a pressure reading that doesn't match what the system expects for the current hydraulic state," Walt said. "System interprets it as an anomalous pressure event. Locks out implement functions as a protective response." He looked at the touchscreen. "The machine is protecting itself from a problem that doesn't exist. It just doesn't know that." Marcus stared at him. "That's not in the fault code documentation," Marcus said. "It's in the service bulletin," Walt said. "SB 9RX 2022-047. Issued October 2022 for machines transported in temperature differentials exceeding 30 degrees Fahrenheit within a 48-hour period." He paused. "What was the temperature in Waterloo when this machine left the factory?" Marcus pulled out his phone. "Checked something. 31 degrees, Marcus said slowly. 2 days ago." "And Cedar Falls yesterday?" Walt said. Marcus checked again. 64, he said quietly. 33-degree differential in 48 hours, Walt said. "That's the threshold." He looked at the tractor. "This machine has been sitting in a showroom at 68 degrees since yesterday afternoon. The sensors have had time to stabilize thermally. What they haven't done is recalibrate to the new baseline." Derek had been standing back, listening, with the expression of a man processing something that is reorganizing his understanding of several things simultaneously. "The service bulletin," Derek said. "SB 9RX 2022-047. "Yes," Walt said. "I've never seen that bulletin," Derek said. "It was issued to master technicians and service managers on the 9RX series specifically," Walt said. "Not general distribution. You'd have to request it through the Technical Resource Portal." He paused. "It's a narrow failure mode. Most dealers would never encounter it." "You encountered it," Derek said. "In Waterloo," Walt said. 2022. First machine off the truck after a cold snap. Took me most of a day to find it the first time." He looked at the tractor. "I wouldn't wish that day on anybody." A silence settled over the showroom floor. The 5 technicians, Derek, Brad, Jason, Marcus, and a 4th technician who had drifted over from the service bay to watch, stood in a loose arc around the 9RX 640 and the man in the gray uniform standing beside it. "Can you fix it?" Marcus said. Walt looked at him. "It's not a repair," Walt said. "It's a recalibration procedure. 45 minutes if you do it manually. 20 minutes if the calibration tool is available." "We have the calibration tool," Derek said immediately. "It came with the machine's delivery package." "Then 20 minutes," Walt said. He looked at Derek. "I'll need access to the base configuration menu," Walt said, "and the calibration tool, and someone who knows where the service bulletin is so we can follow the documented procedure." He looked at Marcus. "You can pull the bulletin through your field engineer access," Walt said. "Faster than going through the portal." Marcus already had his laptop open. He pulled the bulletin in 90 seconds. He turned the laptop toward Walt. Walt read it. He nodded once. "That's the one," he said. He looked at Robert Callahan, who had come out of his office and was standing at the edge of the showroom floor. "Mr. Callahan," Walt said, "I'll need about 20 minutes." Robert looked at him. He nodded. Walt turned to the machine. He went to work. Walt worked the way he had always worked. Methodically. Without hurry. Without performance. He did not explain each step as he did it. He did not narrate for the audience of technicians watching him. He simply followed the procedure, the service bulletin procedure that Marcus had pulled up on his laptop, cross-referenced against Walt's own memory of the day in Waterloo in 2022 when he had first worked through this exact problem. The calibration tool was a small device, a handheld unit that connected to the hydraulic system sensor network through a dedicated port, separate from the main diagnostic connection. It was specific to the 9RX series. It had come in a case with the machine's delivery package and had sat unopened in the dealership's parts room since Tuesday because nobody had known it existed. Walt connected it. He navigated to the base configuration menu, not through the main touchscreen interface that the technicians had been using, but through a secondary access sequence that required a specific key combination on the cab's secondary panel. A sequence that was documented in the service bulletin but nowhere else in the standard technical literature for the machine. Brad watched the key sequence. He pulled out his phone and recorded it. He would add it to the dealership service notes before the end of the day. The calibration procedure itself was not complicated once you were in the right menu with the right tool connected. It was a systematic reset of each hydraulic pressure sensor's baseline reference, walking through 8 sensors in sequence, allowing each one to establish a new calibration reference at the current ambient conditions, confirming each reset before moving to the next. Walt moved through the sequence steadily. Sensor 1. Reset. Confirm. Sensor 2. Reset. Confirm. The technicians watched. Marcus was reading the service bulletin on his laptop, following each step as Walt performed it, the expression on his face shifting gradually from the professional neutrality of a field engineer observing a procedure to something more honest, the expression of a young man watching an older one demonstrate that a degree and a software system are not the same thing as 26 years of knowing where to look. Derek stood with his arms at his sides. He was not taking notes. He was watching Walt's hands. The specific efficiency of those hands, the way they moved to the right location without searching, The way they held the calibration tool at the exact angle required for the port connection, the way they navigated the configuration menu without hesitation, told Derek something that the service bulletin and the diagnostic software and the call to Malene had not told him. It told him that the man in the gray uniform had done this before. Not once. Not twice. Many times. Enough times that the knowledge lived in his hands rather than his memory. Enough times that he didn't need to think about where the port was, or what the key sequence was, or which order the sensors needed to be reset in. Sensor 5. Reset. Confirm. Sensor 6. Reset. Confirm. Robert Callahan had come fully onto the showroom floor now. He stood 20 feet back from the machine, watching. His catered lunch and his 12 farming operations and his 2 journalists were still 17 hours away. The demonstration was still happening. He was beginning to believe it was going to happen. Sensor 7. Reset. Confirm. Sensor 8. Reset. Confirm. Walt backed out of the configuration menu. He disconnected the calibration tool. He looked at the fault code display on the touchscreen. He waited. 10 seconds. The fault code cleared. Not gradually. Not through a diagnostic cycle. It simply disappeared, the amber warning that had been on the screen since the previous morning, that had resisted 6 hours of work from 5 technicians, gone. The implement control panel came alive, the 3-point hitch controls, the PTO engagement, the hydraulic remote levers all becoming active simultaneously as the system's protective lockout released. Walt climbed down from the cab. He stood beside the machine. He looked at Derek. "You'll want to cycle the 3-point hitch through full range a few times," Walt said. "Just to let the system confirm the sensors are reading correctly at both ends of travel. The service bulletin recommends 10 full cycles." Derek climbed into the cab without a word. He cycled the 3-point hitch. Up, down, 10 times. Each cycle clean. Each position reached fully. No fault code return. He climbed down. He looked at Walt. 18 minutes, Brad said quietly. He had been timing it. Nobody responded to that immediately. The showroom was quiet in the way that rooms get quiet when something significant has happened and everyone in them is still processing what they witnessed. Marcus closed his laptop. He looked at Walt. "The service bulletin," Marcus said. "SB 9RX 2022-047. I've been a field engineer for 3 years. I've never seen it. It's narrow distribution," Walt said. "And it's a narrow failure mode. Most dealers would go years without encountering it." "You encountered it in 2022, Marcus said. "In Waterloo," Walt said. "Yes." "And you remembered it," Marcus said. 2 years later. Working here." Walt looked at him. "I remember all of them," Walt said simply. Not boastfully. Just as a plain description of how memory works when you have spent 26 years paying attention. He picked up the calibration tool and put it back in its case. He put the case on the workbench beside the machine. "You'll want to keep that accessible," Walt said to Derek. "Not in the parts room. Any 9RX that comes off transport in significant temperature differential is a candidate for this procedure. Probably worth adding it to your pre-delivery inspection checklist for that model." Derek nodded. He was already writing something in his notebook. Walt picked up his mop handle from against the showroom wall. He looked at Robert Callahan. "Is there anything else, Mr. Callahan?" he said. Robert looked at him. At the gray uniform. At the mop handle. At the 67-year-old man who had just fixed in 18 minutes what 5 technicians had spent 6 hours failing to fix. "Walt," Robert said. "Sit down. Please." They sat in Robert's office. Robert behind his desk. Walt in the chair across from him, the mop handle resting against the wall beside him. Through the office window the showroom floor was visible, the 9RX 640 under its spotlight, Derek and Brad running additional system checks, Marcus on his phone presumably reporting to Malene that the machine was operational. Robert looked at Walt for a long moment. "Tell me about Waterloo," he said. Walt told him. Not quickly, not in detail, but in the way of a man who has a story that is simply the facts of his working life and does not require embellishment. 26 years at a John Deere dealership in Waterloo. Started as a technician at 22. Made master technician at 31, one of the youngest in the region at the time. Became the dealership's lead technician for precision agriculture systems when those systems began appearing in the late 1990s. Trained 17 technicians over his career. Wrote 3 of the dealership's internal service procedures. Was sent to John Deere's training center in Moline 7 times for advanced certification courses. His wife Dorothy had been diagnosed with early-onset Parkinson's in 2010. By 2012, the travel requirements of his position had become impossible. The on-call schedule had become impossible. The stress of a senior technical role while managing Dorothy's care had become impossible. He had retired at 55. Not willingly. "I wasn't ready to stop," Walt said. "I would have worked another 15 years. But Dorothy needed me home. Needed me on a schedule. Needed me not to be 3 hours away at a farm in a field with no cell service when she fell." He looked at his hands. "She passed in 2019, he said. 7 years. Robert was quiet. "And then," Robert said, "and then I was 61 years old and retired and healthy and I needed to do something," Walt said. "I looked at going back to technical work. But the industry had moved. The certifications I held were outdated. Getting recertified would have taken a year and money I didn't have much of after the medical bills." He paused. "And honestly, I was tired. Not of the work. Of the schedule. Of the pressure. Of being the person everyone called when nothing else worked." He looked out the window at the showroom floor. "Your ad said 6 to 2, he said. "Monday through Friday. No on-call. No travel. Physical work, which I needed. And I could be around the machines." He paused. "I missed the machines." Robert looked at him. "You've been listening," Robert said. "All this time. In the service bay. In the showroom." "I work in the service bay every morning," Walt said. "I hear the technicians. I see what they're working on." A slight pause. "Most of the time I don't say anything. It's not my place. They're good technicians. They find the answers." "But today," Robert said. "Today was different," Walt said. "The demonstration. The timeline. I knew what was wrong. I knew it was solvable." He looked at Robert directly. "I should have come forward sooner. I heard them working on it from 9 o'clock. I waited too long." Robert looked at him. "Why did you wait?" Robert said. Walt was quiet for a moment. "Because I mop the floors," he said. "That's what I was hired to do. It's not—" He stopped. "People have a picture of who you are based on what they see you doing. Changing that picture is—" He stopped again. "Uncomfortable," Robert said. "For everyone," Walt said. Robert leaned back in his chair. He thought about 11 years of good mornings. About a man with 26 years of master technician experience showing up at 6 a.m. with a mop because he needed regular hours and a steady paycheck and to be near the machines he had spent his life understanding. He thought about the demonstration tomorrow. About 12 farming operations and 2 journalists and catered lunch and a tractor that was now operational because the man who cleaned his showroom floor had known where to look. He thought about what that said, not about Walt, but about himself. About 11 years of not asking. About the categories he had put people in and the assumptions those categories carried. "Walt," Robert said, "I want to offer you a different job." Walt looked at him. "Not the cleaning job," Robert said. "A technical consultant position. Your own schedule, I know that matters. No on-call. No travel. But I want your knowledge in my service department. I want my technicians to have access to what you know." He paused. "What happened today, the service bulletin, the calibration procedure, that's one example. How many others are there?" Walt looked out at the service bay. "More than you want to know about," he said quietly. Robert nodded. I want to know about all of them, he said. Walt was quiet for a long moment. He looked at his hands. He looked at the mop handle leaning against the wall. He looked at the 9RX 640 through the office window. Operational now, demonstration ready, the fault code gone. The pay would need to reflect the work, Walt said. Name your number, Robert said. Walt named it. Robert agreed without negotiating. Walt looked at him. Just like that, Walt said. Just like that, Robert said. You fixed a $400,000 machine in 18 minutes that 5 technicians couldn't fix in 6 hours. You knew a service bulletin that my field engineer had never seen. You have 26 years of knowledge that my service department doesn't have access to and should. He paused. Whatever you name is less than what that's worth. Walt was quiet. I'll finish the cleaning today, he said. The bathrooms need doing. Robert almost smiled. After the bathrooms, he said. Come find Derek. Walt nodded. He picked up his mop handle. He went to finish his shift. The demonstration happened on Thursday. 9 a.m. 12 farming operations represented. Seed company people. Finance representatives. 2 journalists from agricultural publications. 1 from Farm Journal, 1 from Successful Farming. The John Deere 9RX 640 performed exactly as designed. The 3-point hitch moved through full range. The PTO engaged cleanly. The hydraulic remotes responded precisely. The autonomous guidance system ran 2 demonstration passes through a prepared field section with no human input, the machine navigating by GPS to within 2 centimeters of the programmed path. Robert Callahan gave his presentation. He talked about autonomous agriculture and the future of farming and how Riverside Agricultural was the dealership that brought that future to Cedar Falls. He did not mention the 24 hours before the demonstration. He did not mention the fault code or the 5 technicians or the service bulletin or the 18 minutes. He mentioned it afterward, over the catered lunch, to the 2 journalists. Not as a marketing story, as a true one. He told it completely. The fault code, the 6 hours, the 5 technicians, the field engineer from Des Moines, the call to Moline. And then the man who cleaned the floors and the mop handle and the gray uniform and the 18 minutes. One of the journalists, a woman named Sarah from Farm Journal who had been covering agricultural equipment for 14 years, set down her fork. The cleaning staff member fixed it, she said. The master technician who works as our cleaning staff member, Robert said. Yes. Sarah looked at him. Can I talk to him? She said. Walt was in the service bay when Robert brought Sarah back. He was showing Derek something on a tractor that was in for routine service. Not a fault, just a wear pattern on a hydraulic fitting that Walt had noticed while cleaning around the machine that morning and wanted Derek to look at before it became a fault. He looked up when Robert and Sarah walked in. Robert introduced them. Sarah shook Walt's hand and looked at it, at the calloused, permanently stained hand of a man whose work lived in his hands, whether he was holding a mop or a calibration tool. Mr. Hendricks, Sarah said, can I ask you some questions? Walt looked at Robert. Robert nodded. All right, Walt said. The interview took 40 minutes. Sarah asked about Waterloo and the 26 years in Dorothy and the morning of the demonstration and the service bulletin and the calibration procedure and the 18 minutes. She asked about working as a cleaning professional for 11 years with a master technician's knowledge. Walt answered every question with the same unhurried plainness he brought to everything. At the end, Sarah asked, Is there anything you want people to take from this story? Walt thought about it. He looked at the service bay around him, at Derek working on the routine service tractor, at Brad running a diagnostic on a combine that had come in that morning, at Jason replacing a hydraulic seal on a planter. He looked at the 9RX 640 visible through the service bay door, back in the showroom after the demonstration, gleaming under its spotlight. I want people to know that knowledge doesn't disappear when circumstances change, Walt said. I stopped being a technician in a technical role. I didn't stop knowing what I know. He paused. The service bulletin didn't stop being true because I was holding a mop instead of a diagnostic cable. He looked at Sarah. Experience goes where the person goes. It doesn't care what uniform they're wearing. Sarah wrote that down. The article ran 3 weeks later in Farm Journal. The headline was, "The Janitor Who Fixed What the Engineers Couldn't, and What One Iowa Dealership Learned from It." The article described the demonstration, the fault, the 6 hours, the 18 minutes. It described Walt's background and his years in Waterloo and the reasons he had taken a cleaning job. It quoted Robert Callahan on what he had learned and Derek on what had changed in the service department. And it quoted Walt. "Experience goes where the person goes. It doesn't care what uniform they're wearing." The article was shared widely in the agricultural equipment industry. Robert received calls from 3 other dealerships asking how he had structured Walt's consultant role. The John Deere Technical Training Division reached out to ask if Walt would be willing to contribute to an update of the 9RX service documentation. Walt said he would think about it. He thought about it for a week. He said yes. He drove to Moline in April. He sat in a conference room with 4 John Deere engineers and walked them through the temperature differential calibration failure mode, not from the service bulletin, but from his own experience, the day in Waterloo in 2022 when he had first found it, and the 18 minutes in Cedar Falls when he had found it again. The engineers listened. One of them, a woman named Patricia who had been with John Deere's service engineering team for 20 years, said at the end, "This should have been in the standard technical documentation, not just the narrow distribution bulletin." "Yes," Walt said. "It should have been." "We'll fix that," Patricia said. The documentation update was published in June. SB 9RX 2022-047 was incorporated into the standard technical library for the 9RX series and made available to all dealership technicians, not just master technicians and service managers. Derek printed a copy and put it in the service department's quick reference binder. He put it in the front. Tab 1. Walt came into the service bay on a Monday morning in late June, his regular 6 a.m. start, his regular gray uniform, his regular route through the showroom and the service bay and the bathrooms. He saw the binder open on Derek's workbench. He saw his service bulletin on tab 1. He didn't say anything about it. He picked up his mop. He went to work. Later that morning Derek came in and found Walt mopping the service bay floor and stopped. "Walt," Derek said. Walt looked up. "Thank you," Derek said, "for the demonstration day. And for," he gestured at the binder, "for everything you've been showing us." Walt looked at him. "You're good technicians," Walt said. "All of you. You just needed the bulletin." "We needed more than the bulletin," Derek said. Walt looked at the mop. He looked at the service bay, at the machines in various stages of repair, at the technicians working on them, at the organized flow of a department that was running better than it had been 6 months ago. "You needed someone who'd seen it before," Walt said. "Yes," Derek said. "We did." Walt nodded. He went back to mopping. The floor needed doing. The machines needed someone who had seen it before. Both things were true simultaneously. Both things had always been true. The knowledge was there the whole time. In the man pushing the mop. In the gray uniform. In the hands that had spent 26 years learning where to look. The uniform changed. The knowledge didn't. It never does. If this story stayed with you, if you've ever been looked past, or if you've ever looked past someone, subscribe to the channel and join our growing family. Ring the bell. Share this with someone who knows that wisdom doesn't announce itself. We'll see you at the next one.